Welcome to the Connor's Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. June 10th, 2019. It's going to be a very special night for the Civil War Roundtable of New York. They're going to have one of our favorite guests, Civil War historian Dennis Frye. How you doing today, sir?
I am doing great and thrilled to be on the program with you today. Thanks for the invitation.
Okay, so now what are you going to be talking about on June 10th?
Well, I'm going to be speaking about my most recent book. It's entitled Antietam Shadows, Mystery, Myth, and Machination.
So 150 plus years after the battle, there's still some mysteries about it?
Oh, my, there's so many mysteries, and there's so many misconceptions. I'm very blessed. I actually grew up very near the Antietam battlefield, and where many people have to travel long distances to come and visit the place, I can be there in 5 minutes from my home. And so I've spent nearly 50 years studying the Antietam battlefield and walking its grounds and thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And the more rumination I do, the more that's been revealed to me, and I've discovered that there's many misconceptions and misunderstandings about Antietam, and that's what Antietam Shadows is all about.
Okay, let's step back for the listener who may know something about the battle, but not a lot. Who was the commander of the Confederate armies? Who was the commander of the Union Army?
Well, I think most of your listeners will recognize the name of the Confederate commander, without doubt, the most famous Southern commander of the Civil War, Robert E. Lee. And this is an important period in history because this is the first invasion of the North by a Confederate army. There were three total. The most famous one is the second invasion in Gettysburg. But Antietam was the result of the first invasion, and Lee would be commander of the Army of Northern Virginia. The Union commander, George B. McClellan, and he and President Lincoln didn't get along well. In fact, President Lincoln had just fired McClellan prior to the invasion. But once the Confederates crossed the Potomac River and started to head north towards Pennsylvania, Lincoln literally was looking around for a general. So he got down on his hands and knees and went back to the man he just fired, and George McClellan became the commander of the Army of the Potomac. And those were the two men who faced off against each other at Antietam, Lee and McClellan.
Now, of course, some historians debate, was it a tactical victory? Was it a tie strategically? What's your opinion?
Well, I talk about that quite a bit in Antietam Shadows, and I am not of the school that it is a tactical draw. I was for a long time. Most historians consider it a tactical draw, and most aficionados of the Civil War look at it as a tactical draw because after 12 hours of a slugfest and nearly 24,000 men dead and wounded in what is the bloodiest day in American history, Lee still was on the ground. McClellan was still on the ground. So if you look at actual holding of the positions, it looks like a draw. It's not. It's not anywhere close to a draw. It is an enormous Union victory. It is one of the most important United States victories on any battlefield in any war America participated in. And I think that's been often overshadowed and overlooked. And that's one reason that I use the word shadows in the title of my new book, because so much of Antietam still hasn't really been revealed.
Why do you have a different opinion than many historians? Not all, obviously, but why was it a victory?
Well, first of all, I consider myself an expert on Antietam. Many Civil War historians are experts in specific fields. There's more Gettysburg experts than there are people on the planet. But Antietam is one of those battles that historians have ignored for generations. It's really gotten very little coverage. If you stacked up the number of books on Gettysburg and the number of books on Antietam, and you literally put stacks beside each other, Gettysburg would be stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks. Antietam would barely look like one stack. And so it's a battle that has just received very, very limited attention. And so I've enjoyed studying it in great detail, questioning its conclusions and questioning the conclusions of other historians. And so I feel for the following reasons that it's very, very significant in American history. One, it allowed Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. No other battle gave the president that opportunity. Two, diplomatic opportunities for the South were at their apex in September of 1862. England and France were giving serious consideration to some form of intervention in the war, which would have been a disaster for the North. That doesn't happen because of Antietam. England and France basically bow out of any opportunities to assist the South, and so that's significant. And finally, and this is maybe more important than anything, is that it was a congressional election year, and the Republicans were on the verge of defeat in September of 1862. The war was going badly for Lincoln. and the Republican Party. And so if the Democrats had won the congressional elections in September of 1862, they would have ended the war. They would have cut off all appropriations. The House of Representatives has that power, and I don't care who the president is. If you don't have money, war doesn't continue. And so the Democrats would have ended the war in the fall of 1862 without the great victory at Antietam. Lincoln used that victory, and the Republicans used that victory to say, look, we know what we're doing. We can beat these people. And that was a tale that was told in the polls. The Republicans held on. So for those three reasons, the emancipation, the diplomatic interest, and the election of 1862, no other battle comes close to Antietam in terms of importance.
Now, what did you learn in your studies over the years about General McClellan?
Well, I'll be the first to tell you I don't like George McClellan. In fact, I'll be stronger than that. I hate George McClellan. And most historians, well, let me not put it that way. Many Civil War people, the millions of people who enjoy studying and reading about and learning about the Civil War, share my opinion of George McClellan. They don't like him. He's egotistical, he's arrogant, he's insubordinate. I could go on with all the things that I don't like about George McClellan. And I have spent most of my career bashing McClellan. But I must admit, in the last decade or so, I've reassessed my opinions of McClellan, not because I like him more, but because I've tried to divorce myself from my own prejudice against him and actually go beyond myself and see if there was anything the man did that was good, anything. And I actually discovered, once I was able to take my own personal prejudice out of the picture, very difficult to do, incidentally, that McClellan had some major accomplishments during the invasion of 1862. In fact, in my book, Antietam Shadows, I actually have chapters entitled, now get this is this was hard to write, but it's true. Did McClellan outthink Lee?
All right. We're waiting for the answer.
You have to read the book.
Okay.
And I will be speaking about that. I will be using one of the chapters, Did McClellan Outthink Lee? That'll be one of the topics I intend to discuss at my New York City Civil Roundtable appearance. You
talk about some of the myths. What are some of the myths that you cover in your book?
Well, I'll give you an example of a myth. This involves Robert E. Lee. One of the writer of this, now hold your pants. The writer of this particular myth is none other than Pulitzer Prize winner Douglas Southall Freeman. Now, what kind of idiot would take on Dr. Freeman? Well, I guess I must be that idiot. I admire Freeman. I love Freeman. I've got Freeman's books. Freeman's biography on Lee is just a remarkable piece of work. His 3 volumes on Lee's lieutenants is unequaled. I like Dr. Freeman, and he's a tremendous writer. However, he makes mistakes just like we all do. He's human. And I discovered a big blunder of his. In his opening page on the Battle of Antietam in Volume 2 of his biography on Lee, he has a quotation. And the quotation is, "We shall make our stand on those hills." That's a direct quote of Robert E. Lee. And it's attributed to a Civil War soldier through a writing that he did, and so it's referenced, et cetera, et cetera. Turns out that General Lee never said that. Turns out that the Confederate soldier that Freeman cites wasn't even at Antietam. He was home recovering from illness and did not join the Army in Northern Virginia until a week after the battle. That's the kind of myths that I discovered. And in that case, it was a myth that Dr. Freeman perpetuated because he did not do thorough research and just took for granted that this biographer, this particular Civil War soldier writing an autobiography, was telling the truth. It was not true.
All right, now let's get to 2 players that are famous for the Battle of Antietam. General A.P. Hill, and I can't not mention that since you're coming to New York.
Well, of course, General Hill, quite a character in the war, very famous division commander. General Lee depended upon him. Even General Jackson had great respect for General Hill. Now, they didn't get along. In fact, Jackson actually, in Jackson's inimical way, he had General Hill under arrest as the invasion began in September of 1862 for not moving fast enough, promptly enough. So he put him under arrest. But old Jack was smart enough to know when he was ready to go into battle, he didn't want one of his leading generals under arrest. And so as they approached Harpers Ferry, where they were going to go into battle, General Jackson arrested the arrest, and Hill went into the fight. And he really was the determining factor in the Battle of Harpers Ferry. He's the one who forced the Union surrender, the capitulation at Harpers Ferry just prior to Antietam. Of course, I'm mentioning Harpers Ferry because that's where Hill was when the battle began on September the 17th. And he received an urgent message from Lee to come north. He marched rapidly in a forced march with his men towards Sharpsburg, which is a day's march north of Harpers Ferry. He arrived on the field just in time to halt the advance of the Union Army that was being led by Ambrose Burnside. And he saved General Lee that day. No question about it. If Hill hadn't come up on the field, Lee's army would have been flanked. His line of retreat would have been sliced, and it would have been doomsday for Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia. So General Hill literally rescued Lee from oblivion that day in that incredible march from and then fight on the field of Antietam. One of my favorite characters. He didn't do as well once he became a corps commander. In fact, at Gettysburg, he's often thought of the absent Hill. He doesn't have the same reputation as he did as a division commander. But, boy, I often think Antietam might have been his best day of the war.
All right, now you mentioned General Burnside. So Burnside Bridge, what can we learn about General Burnside?
Well, first of all, I want to admit a prejudice in favor of General Burnside. And, again, you would say, what kind of Civil War historian could possibly like Ambrose Burnside? As you can tell, I'm quirky. I love to deal with people who have been downtrodden and beaten up over the generations, and Burnside certainly is at the top of that hill. And I have an affinity for General Burnside in that the home that I own and restored, the historic house that I have, was General Burnside's headquarters. Right after Antietam, he was here at my house for almost 2 weeks. And he had an important visitor while he was here, and that was Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln conferenced with Burnside in my home on October the 2nd, 1862. But there's a misunderstanding of Burnside Bridge in this conception, and I talk about it in Antietam Shadows. The belief is that Burnside just literally bashed and bashed and bashed against that bridge, that bulkhead, and that he was just committing suicide with each one of these attacks. Turned out that's not the case at all. Burnside went around the bridge. He flanked the Confederates and forced them out of that position and suffered very few casualties. And what tipped me off that something strange had happened at Burnside Bridge was this. In the area around the cornfield, Eastwoods, Westwoods, there's nearly 13,000 Union and Confederate casualties. In the area around the Bloody Lane, there's nearly 9,000 casualties on both sides. Ambrose Burnside took the bridge, the most difficult position on the field for an offensive assault, suffered 400 casualties. He went around it. He flanked the enemy out of that position. That's what forced the Confederates to leave. It was a brilliant flanking maneuver. Burnside gets absolutely no credit for it. I talk about this in Antietam Shadows.
All right, so we've learned a lot already. Now, let me ask you something. The person out there is saying, can they go to the Antietam battlefield today, and what's it like?
Well, boy, first of all, I want to invite people to the Antietam battlefield. It's not far from Washington or Baltimore. Hour and a half drive from either Washington or Baltimore, you're at Antietam. It's in western Maryland. It's easily accessed from Interstate 81 or Interstate 70. And it's located in a very rural part of western Maryland. The beautiful thing about Antietam is its preservation. It is among the best preserved Civil War sites in the United States. A Union or Confederate soldier could go to Antietam today, go to the place where they fought, and recognize that location immediately. The battlefield has changed so little since September 17, 1862. So if anyone wants to learn what a Civil War battlefield looks like, unmarred, unblemished, Antietam's the place to go.
All right. Now, on June 10th, are you going to have copies of your book with you?
Well, the Round Table has invited me to bring copies, and I certainly
hope so.
will. The book is my newest book. It sells for $20, and I will say that the proceeds from the book go either towards Civil War battlefield preservation or into scholarships that I offer for students to study the Civil War at universities and colleges. And so it doesn't go into my pocket and make any money for me. I use all the proceeds to help others or help save battlefields. So you almost can think of it as a contribution toward battlefield preservation or helping a young person learn more about the Civil War.
Why should we even care about the Civil War? It's over more than 150 years ago.
Well, for many people, the Civil War is not over. We still debate its causes. We still are not in agreement with what caused the Civil War. I have a chapter in Antietam Shadows that's entitled, Let's Agree, We Disagree. And it's all about the causes of the Civil War and the fact that we cannot come to agreement. It often depends upon geography. Where did you grow up? What were you taught? In terms of how, it's point of view. It's point of view as to how people look at the war and understand it. I personally, and I'm not bashful about this, I will tell anyone this, I personally believe the war was the principal cause of the American Civil War is slavery. Notice I didn't say was. I put it in present tense, is slavery, because people that debate it today debate it in present tense. And I'm often attacked for that belief, but I stand firm. And I think that everything points, every direction of the compass points at slavery as the cause of the Civil War. But we're not in agreement in that in America. And, of course, that's one of the wonderful things about the First Amendment. We don't have to agree. And so I think one reason the war still lives is because it's so hotly debated. Thankfully, we don't have New Yorkers killing South Carolinians, and we don't have North Carolinians killing people from Massachusetts. Thankfully, on battlefields within our own, along the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers. Thank God that's not where we are. But I think a lot of people still like to debate the Civil War, and that's what keeps it alive.
And thank you to historians like you who come up with different ideas and keep history alive and keep it vibrant.
Well, we have to, Mike. I think one reason that history is often considered a dead waste of time is because we don't do well sharing with people that history is not facts, it's not dates, it's not chronology, and it's not rote memorization and regurgitation of dates and chronology on some idiot test. I mean, that's how we teach history, and no wonder most people hate history. They hate it.
Is history taught anymore in schools, though? My feedback, it isn't.
Another problem. When you look at STEM, science, technology, English, math, or engineering math, actually, would be STEM, where the devil's history fit in there? And so if we do STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, at least they're able to include history as under the arts. But it's sad. We have now so many people who know how to build a computer or a robot and think they're helping humanity with their science, and they are. But think about how many people don't know anything about humanity, don't know anything about their fellow humans, because they don't know anything about the history of humans.
June 10th, 2019, Civil War Roundtable of New York, 3 West 51st Street. Doors open at 5:30. You're going to hear Dennis Frye. Thank you for being on Connor's Corner.
Real pleasure. Looking forward to my visit to New York City and hope to see some of your listeners there.
Thank you.